The sirens on the Ecto-1 went off way too early, and I had to restrain myself from smacking my old Ghostbusters alarm clock. A, because it was probably a collector's item, and B, I already had to hot glue Slimer back on once, and he had looked so disappointed when I had to find him under my bed. Poor guy had to live through the 90s, and both my older brother and I wasn't trying to make it worse for him. I got up, shuffling a little as I headed for the kitchen. I had let Sarah talk me into going pub crawling with her the night before. The name is apt because after drinking at about 12 pubs in Ohio, a crawl was all I could manage. She had dropped me off at my house at about 1, having driven us home afterward without a sway or a word. Apparently, her fairy powers allowed her to drink like a fish and then sparkle her intoxication away. She could not, however, sparkle me sober. So, Sarah had gotten to see the rarely encountered drunken mortician. I don't drink often, and when I do, I don't usually get quite that blotto. Now, I had a hangover from hell, and I felt like all I wanted to do was crawl back into bed and sleep it off. But no, it was Thursday and office hours were from 8 to 5. That did mean that at 12:01, I wasn't going upstairs to take a nap for an hour. But for now, I had to be presentable. So I made something Dad had always talked about, and I had watched him slurp with a queasy tummy from time to time. Dad had not been much of a drinker either, but sometimes after a party or a special event, Dad could be seen making what he affectionately called a prairie oyster. Now, if you're listening to this and you're hungover, and you'd like to make your own prairie oyster, don't worry, I've got you. Just add a raw egg to a shot glass of Worcestershire sauce, about 8 to 10 squirts of vinegar, hot sauce works too, a pinch of salt, as well as a pinch of black pepper. Then you drink it all down in one big gulp and go drink 5 glasses of water to get the taste out of your mouth. The water was probably what you needed in the first place, you dehydrated bastard, but the oyster helps with the hangover, so you're welcome. Now, if you get salmonella, don't blame me. You were the one dumb enough to drink something that you heard about in a place like this. I was getting the egg ready to put the concoction when my phone started blaring in my pocket and scared the hell out of me. I dropped the egg, shell and all, into the cup and cursed loud enough to make my mother harumph from the living room as she watched the morning news. I apologized and I took out my phone, trying not to growl as I answered. Yeah, said a familiar voice, but my drink-addled mind couldn't place it.
Sorry, I only had your personal number. I need to set up a funeral.
I tried to make my brain work and finally came around to the name. Cato. This was Jericho's son. Cato, sorry, I didn't recognize the number. What's up? You said you needed...
I need to set up a funeral,
he said again, and I could hear him trying to hold back a sob as he moved away from the noisy place to somewhere quieter. No problem. Sorry, I'm a little foggy this morning. Had a rough night last night.
That makes 2 of us,
he said with a venomous laugh. I took a notepad from beside the phone Mom kept in the kitchen and started making notes. Okay, who's the funeral for?
It's...
He started, sobbing into the phone again before getting control of himself.
It's for my dad. I need a funeral for Jericho. My dad.
And the pencil snapped in my hand. What the hell did he just say?
I can come in and set up the particulars, but I need it to be soon. He needs to be buried before the new pack leader can be chosen.
And I was silent. My breathing raged as I tried to remain professional. More for Cato than for me. Poor kid sounded like he was barely holding it together. What happened? I asked, my words coming out breathy and unclear. There was a choky, strange sound on the other end. Someone blowing their nose, and then Cato came back a little hoarsely.
I can't right now. I'll be by later, after sunset. Can you see me?
Of course, I said. Cato, if you need anything, don't hesitate to...
I'll see you then,
he said, and he hung up, and I couldn't say anything else. I just sat there in my bathrobe, head still pounding, and when Mom came in from the living room, she must have known that something was wrong. Tyler? What's wrong? I had to clear my throat a couple of times before I could speak. Do you remember Mr. Jericho? The one who helped with the skinwalker a few months ago? Yes. Is he okay? She said. And I shook my head. He's dead. He's dead. I said again, and when she came closer, I buried my face against the front of her pink bathrobe. And I just cried. I couldn't help it. Jericho and I weren't exactly friends, but he had come to my aid when I needed him. Hadn't charged me more than the pelt that he had gotten from the beasts that he killed, and I had been grateful for that. I was grateful for everyone who'd come to help me, and I would have reacted the same way to the news that any of them had died. And I just sat there and I cried. My mother patting me on the back until I could get it together enough to get my clothes and go conduct business. Cato arrived around sunset. I had just shown out the last of my clients, a little gaggle of pixies who tried to pay me in bones, and he looked at them dubiously as they shuffled out. Bones were another of the numerous things that I did not take as payment, and the pixies had not been happy to hear it. They said that they would come back with something more substantial, but I suspected that they would just be back again, probably next week, offering someone else's bones. Cato was dressed in a fine black suit, the kind that looked tailor-made as opposed to the kids in India who probably were making the ones that I bought at the outlet malls. He had an entourage, a couple of other hellhounds in suits, and he told them to wait at the door as he came into my office. "Sir, we really shouldn't," one of them said, but Cato cut him off.
"The mortician is someone my father trusted implicitly. I have gone into battle with him, and he saved my life when my father fought the skinwalker. I trust him more than anyone else in this room, and I will go into his office and discuss my father's final wishes alone. You can wait here or you can return to the car. Hell, return to the pack for all I care. I did not ask for an escort."
His teeth were out, and he had gotten progressively furrier as the conversation went on. Though the other wolf were a lot bigger than him, I saw him show difference to Cato, something that shocked me a little. Most of these guys seemed to follow the biggest and the strongest, and if this guy was cowed by Cato, then he must be higher in the pack's food chain than I thought. The guards stayed outside the door, and Cato came inside, offering me a handshake before sitting.
"Mortician,"
he said, and when I finally finished pumping his arm, I threw a hug around him, feeling him bristle beneath it. "It's Tyler, man. We have been through a lot together, and that means something to me too." I thought for just a moment that he might resist or even push me, but he eased up a little and hugged me back after a few seconds. And for a moment, we just stood there, and I felt him shudder with silent, powerful tears. And after a few minutes, he inhaled deeply, breaking the hug and stepping back, wiping his eyes.
"So,"
he said, clearing his throat.
"My father's will is clear on what's to be done. The funeral is more symbolic than anything. After the service, we'll take him to the Pack community and burn him, as has been our custom for generations. He was not only my father, he was also the last remaining member of the Legion, the final soldier of Pluto, and he will be honored in this way, as is our tradition."
I tried to find the right words. "How did it?" But Cato cut me off.
"Mission first, then we can discuss details."
I gave him the family discount. I felt better about taking his money after that. Cato had a budget of about $100,000 for the service, but we didn't use nearly half that much. I got him one of my best caskets on the floor, but he still wanted the one that we could burn. We talked about flowers and food after the service. He was ambivalent about flowers, but wanted a good feeling after the service. He was expecting the whole pack to show up, around 50, and he was willing to pay a little more in case things got rowdy.
That many hellhounds at one place, and that kind of sorrow, is bound to spark a fight or two.
We hammered out the details, and Cato put a bag of denarii on my desk, which made it groan a little.
"That should cover it,"
he said, and I didn't bother to count it. Instead, I walked over to the fridge in the corner and took out a couple of beers. Now, I know that sounds weird, a mortician with a beer in his office, but I've had a lot of late nights down here as I try to make the books add up. And sometimes it helps me with the headaches. It was good beer. I had splurged a little. and Cato nodded approvingly as he twisted the cap off and took a sip. I took out the beer opener, not quite at the cap-twisting level yet, and held my bottle out in salute. "To the dead," I said, and he touched the neck to his own to mine.
May they stay dead.
He intoned, and the meaning was something shared by the both of us. "So," I asked, leaning across the desk, "how did it happen?" Cato tipped the bottle, finishing it in one pull before reaching for mine, and I let him have it. My stomach was still in an uproar from the night before, and I figured that he needed a little more liquid courage than me. He inhaled as he finished the second, smacking his lips appreciatively before starting.
We have a long-standing list of contracts with Vatican. Recent reports have indicated that a known vampire clan has grown significantly over the last few decades. My father has been inserting me into the skirmish teams, allowing me to lead a few of them. I admit that working alongside the church has been a strange experience. However, their exorcist and black hat task force have proven to be skilled in combat. For a period, it appeared that we had been making a strong push against them, but we were wrong.
"Who are they? What makes this group of vampires so different?" I asked, not sure what the fuss was.
They are a ruthless clan, led by an elder whose identity remains unknown to us. They see themselves as superior to humans, and in the past 6 months, they have devastated 2 small rural towns. They either turn the townspeople into more of their kind or drain them dry. Unlike traditional vampires, who prefer to stay hidden and adhere to the council's accords, these creatures are brazen. They attack both during the day and in plain sight. Despite our extensive efforts to infiltrate and dismantle their nests, our progress has been minimal.
He gazed at the stained glass window, its vibrant colors shimmering as the sun dipped below the horizon.
One of our vehicles suffered a mechanical failure. Our standard procedure is to form a protective perimeter around the vehicle, creating a 360-degree coil. As we dismounted, a massive explosion erupted. Something struck one of our vehicles with such force that it crumbled, lighting up the sky. We were ambushed, and it turned into a bloodbath. My father and Mr. Caro were shouting orders, trying to regroup when I saw it. The bull.
"The bull?" I asked, puzzled.
Yes, that's what we call their leader. I've only encountered 1 or 2 before, but this one was different. Far larger than usual. It moved with incredible speed, cutting through our forces effortlessly. My father closed in on it, and despite its intimidation, he seemed to have it under control. The bull was on its knees, its arms trembling as my father threatened to break them. Then, out of nowhere, something appeared and sank its teeth into my father. Caro rushed to get him out, but just then, a swarm of 3 hooded figures arrived and surrounded them. Within moments, the bull, Caro, and the figures disappeared, leaving behind a chilling silence in my father's lifeless, drained body.
He said, his voice breaking. I reached out and I touched his shoulder. He shook his head, fighting to regain his composure, and when he spoke again, he was steadier.
We brought him back, tended to our wounds. Then I reached out to you. Now we're just trying to cope with our loss. The pack needs both order and a strong leader.
I sighed and I shook my head slowly. God, it's awful. Have you found Mr. Caro? And Cato shook his head.
No, not yet. Although, based on the latest intel, we should be able to track him down. There's a strong possibility he might have turned into a bull.
I'm sorry, Cato. This is just terrible. Who's been leading the pack now?
I've been temporarily promoted in Corral's absence. He and my father were the last of their kind, the final remnants of the great line of warriors. I will do everything to ensure that their legacy is honored. This is now my responsibility, and I will not tarnish my father's memory by failing.
I'm sure you're doing everything that you can, I said, and Cato sniffed as he got up.
If I was, my father would not be dead.
He said, extending a hand to shake again.
I will contact you in a few days. We'll bring the body tomorrow, so you may prepare him.
And that's when he left, taking his guards with him, and I was left to think about Cato and his situation. I suppose it wasn't that different from the one that I had with myself and my own father. The saving grace being that Jericho was really dead and not trying to kill his son or his pack. I suppose, however, as I close up and I went to eat dinner, that the ghost haunting Cato was almost worse. You can't put the ghost of a dead father down with shotgun shells.
That's nuts.
Sarah said, her head on my shoulder as we watched something on the laptop.
I hadn't heard anything about a group of vampires that strong.
Why would you? I asked with a laugh. Do vampires often bother the fairy courts? And she shook her head.
Not always, but if they're that much of a problem, we usually know about them. These guys sound like real monsters. I'm sorry your friend died,
she added, kissing my cheek. Have you made any headway with your mom? I asked, not sure why, but because I wanted to change the subject.
No, not really. She's still set on me taking my sister's place as the Princess of Summer. She doesn't want to hear about any of this remaining human stuff and wants me to make my choice.
Why does she want you to choose so badly? Is something wrong with your sister? Sarah was quiet for a little while, the movie playing on as I let her collect her thoughts. Sarah and I had been getting closer and closer as the weeks went on, and we had been very clear on the no secrets rule. I had learned about the Fey realms, and she had learned about my family and what I had seen and done in the short time that I had been running the mortuary for hybrids. This seemed to be one of those things that was harder for her to put into words, and when she started telling it, I jumped a little, realizing that I had been nodding some.
My sister, Rayshaw. She's about 2 years younger than me. She's full Fey. She made her choice at 16, and she's been the Princess of Summer ever since. 2 years ago, however, someone in the Winter Court took offense to something she had done. It was a minor thing, nothing to really get your nose out of joint about, but they cursed her over it.
What, like they called her a bitch? I said, laughing a little. And she laughed too, but it had a little more exasperation than mine.
No, goober. I mean like a real curse, a magic one. The curse is slowly turning her into ice. Her arms and legs are already icy, and it's creeping over her chest and stomach now. The healers have given her a year tops, but no one seems to be able to break the curse, and no one in the Winter Court will admit to doing it, though Mother has an idea who it was. My sister has a year to live, barring some cure be found. And when she dies, my mother wants me to take her place.
And I thought about it for a moment. It's a real conundrum.
You said it,
she said with a sigh. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kill the mood.
Who said you killed the mood?
She said with a chuckle. And I grinned, turning my face to kiss her. And I don't really remember the rest of the show. It's always nice to revel in the pleasures of life before you're forced to come face to face with death. They brought me Jericho around sunset the next day. For a pack that was worried about running afoul of vampires, they certainly chose some weird hours to be active. If a rival vampire clan was after me, I sure as hell would have gotten my business done and been behind a threshold by sunset. That was one of those vampire things that, it appeared, was true. And I was glad for it. It meant that maybe I didn't have to worry about it so much. His people didn't seem to want to leave him at first, but Cato told them to leave it to me.
His dress uniform is here, in a garment bag,
he said as he swallowed a sob. And he left then, getting back into the Humvee as they rolled off. There was a large gun on the roof, and I felt pretty sure it wasn't street legal, but everyone mourns differently. So I rolled up my sleeves, and I got to work. Even dead and drained of blood, Jericho was an imposing figure. He had shrunk a little, but he was still built like a power lifter. I drained him out, put some of the stuff in him that we use when we want to cremate afterward, but still want a viewing, and cleaned him up. He was covered in little cuts and scratches, and they were still crusty with blood. Someone had indeed cleaned his face, but that seemed to be all that they had the stomach for. And I got him ready, but I had to stop a few times to swallow my own sadness. It was silly. I hadn't known Jericho very well. We were acquaintances. I was a client, but I pushed that aside quickly. That cheapened the man, and I wasn't about to do that. Jericho and I were something, even if it wasn't friends. He had come to help me in my time of need, brought his son along, and even if it was just something that would strengthen him in the eyes of the pack, he had still come to help me. He had helped me afterwards too, and I was grateful. It just doesn't seem real, I told him, stitching up a particularly bad spot on his chest. It feels like you're going to open your eyes any minute now, and you'll thank me for the patch job. This is so weird, I said, half sobbing and half laughing. You're a warrior, a Roman centurion, an ancient killing machine, an engine of destruction. You aren't made to be laid out on my table like this. You're supposed to be standing over my grave and shaking your head as you deliver some gruff and heartfelt speech. You aren't supposed to be dead. But he was. Jericho didn't get up and just say, "Huh, never thought of it like that. Guess I'm alive again." He just stayed dead. So I stitched him up. I cleaned his body, and I dressed him and I got him ready. Drained or not, the guy was solid. And as I struggled with him, I heard a gasp from behind me that almost made me drop him. I whirled, expecting a startled vampire and getting it. But luckily, it was Corey. In all the preparation, I had completely forgotten what day it was.
Lord of Flies, is that?
Yeah, I said, straining. Even drained. He's a little heavy. Could he give us a hand? And he did. And soon we had Jericho in his box and into the lift. I would raise him into the fellowship hall.
Gotta admit,
Corey said after we got it all in place.
I was not expecting to find you making final preparations for him.
Yeah, me either.
How's his son taking it?
He said, putting things away as he restocked. About as well as he can, I said. Then, on a whim, I asked. He said that he got taken out by this group of vampires that they've been hunting. Said they were a really nasty group. Have you heard anything about them? And I heard Corey drop something, and he craned around the shelf to look at me with real worry.
They, haven't come to talk to you, have they? 'Cause if they're interested in your blood, then I strongly recommend you seek religious help.
No, nothing like that, I said. But they are the ones who killed Jericho. Apparently Cerberus has been doing work for the Vatican trying to hunt them down. And Corey shuddered.
I don't envy them. They've been trying to edge Dad out of the recreational blood business, but his clients are kind of adamant that they want what he's selling. It's gonna come to a head soon, but Dad doesn't seem worried. Not that he ever is.
Are they different or something? I mean, vampires are vampires, right?
Well,
Corey said, looking like he was about to tell me something that he shouldn't.
not really. Dad and I are bloodsuckers, Count Dracula types, though don't tell him I said that, because apparently it's as close to a racial slur as we have. Some vampires feed off of fear, more like Nosferatu than Dracula. Those guys are spooky. Dad had some of them from the old world come over to visit once, and they don't even look human. They were all so pale, and they looked like corpses. No hair, no eyelids. Their fingers were really long. The sun kills them, no exception, but they tend to be able to do more of the cool stuff, like super speed and shape changing and flying, that sort of thing.
Wait. You can fly? And Corey looked embarrassed.
No, Dad can't either. That's why we have the shape changing. I can turn into a bat, but I'm still kind of young. Dad can turn into a bat or a rat, and I saw him turn into a wolf once, but it looked more like a gray Pomeranian. The creepy guys I talked to had a bunch of different forms, and they could do it at will. These new guys, though, they're different. They drink blood too, but they seem to get more out of the act of taking it. They feed on the fear as much as they feed on the blood. A lot of the old vampire houses are scared of them. They aren't following the rules. They're killing out in the open. And if someone doesn't stop them soon, they're going to attract the attention of the normies.
And I thought about that a lot as I went about the rest of my day. Just one more weird little factoid for my collection. The fellowship hall barely fit them all. Some came dressed like anyone else, suits and ties, dresses and veils. But a few came in togas and sandals. I noticed that these were given great deference, and I suppose that they might be the generation after the warriors had taken the oath of Pluto. Most of them were graying, older men and women who came with canes or shaky legs. And I wondered why Jericho hadn't aged like that. Was it the oath? Maybe these wolves had never taken it, and they had got the strength but not the lifespan. Surely they must have gotten some kind of extended time, though, because while they wore togas in line with the fashion in Rome, they didn't look any older than 60 or 70. Cato arrived first, but he wasn't alone. He had brought a missus with him, who I assumed was Jericho's wife, a tall woman with long hair the color of coals in a fire. Trailing behind her were 7 children, some in diapers and some old enough for middle school. They all bore the brindling that I'd seen on Jericho, as well as the lighter red of their mother's hair, and I realized that she was something a little different. She introduced herself as Lou, and seemed to know me already. My late husband spoke of you fondly. He had a lot of respect for your family, especially you after that business with the skinwalker. He said you handled yourself very well, and that he and Joe would likely be dead if it wasn't for you. And she bowed low, and several of the children did as well. The somber-looking baby was almost comical as it inclined its pudgy, fuzzy head. They took their seats in the front row, and Cato offered me a hand as he blinked back tears.
You made him look dignified. I appreciate this.
Of course, I said, clearing my throat to keep from blubbering. If you need anything, just let me know. And Cato nodded, and as the service began, I heard the door open, and Cato gasped in surprise.
He came,
he whispered.
I can't believe it.
And I looked back to see the other man in a toga. But the difference between him and the others was striking. To say that he was statuesque would have been too much on the nose. There were statues of this man, and they did not do him justice. His skin was alabaster, white as plaster of Paris, and the toga that he wore was midnight black with gold piping and a large silver skull clasp. His dark hair was cut short, his mouth was smooth and hairless, and his eyes were the color of molten gold. The wolves who saw him rose to bow to him in deference, and he waved to them to sit as he approached Cato. He towered nearly 8 feet, and was oh so careful when he took the young hellhound's hand. Dearest warrior, seeing your father cross into the underworld has pained me. I did not think that this would become a reality for many years yet. The time is sometimes cruel. The world has lost its truest traveler, its last greatest warrior, and it is poorer for it. You have my promise that Jericho will serve as my personal guard for all of time. He will know no rest, no leisure, only bloodshed and strife, as it was in life, and so below. And tears started streaming down Cato's face, nodding as he tried to find his voice.
Thank you, my lord. It is what you would want. What he always wanted. He always admired the Norse and their Valhalla, but you have given him a warrior's afterlife that I hope to earn one day.
You have taken the oath, my son. You can expect nothing less. And then he went and he took his seat beside Lou, and the service began. It was a nice service, but it definitely got a little bit rowdy. There were eulogies, stories, and memories, as well as tears shared in equal parts. But the funeral also seemed to be kind of a forum. When the tears were shed and the memories were poured out, Cato began to invite them to the back for food, but it seemed that they weren't done. Oi, what's being done about the fingers? Someone yelled, and Cato showed his teeth, not liking being interrupted.
We are searching for their nest, so they may be...
Has Mr. Cowell been found yet?
As the true alpha, he should be, said another. But the growl that ripped from Cato quieted him.
I am your true alpha, and I will have order. This is my father's funeral, not a Roman Senate.
You are no alpha, boy, someone yelled, and I couldn't tell who it was, and Cato began frothing.
Come up here and say that. If any of you want to challenge me for the right to lead, step up and be humbled.
And with that, a few did. And the pews were pushed back so that way they could tussle. And Cato was no lightweight, and his father had trained him well. He tussled with more than a few of the pack who were bigger than him, but he did put them to shame, one after another. I'm sorry, said a voice, and I looked up to see Lou standing beside me, the dour baby still on her hip. This isn't how we usually are. It's been hard, losing the alpha and his second in 1 week. And I nodded. So, not to be rude, but are you one of the Legion too, or... And she laughed. No, I'm not Jericho's first wife. Only his most recent. My mate's other children passed long ago, and the pups I bore him were his world. But no, I'm not of his world. Sorry, I said, feeling embarrassed. I didn't mean to pry. You have a very wolfish aspect about you, so I just assumed. She laughed again, this time a real belly shaker. I will choose not to be offended by that. Jericho found me along the border of Mexico when he was on his last mission. Nearby village was concerned that I was killing their livestock. It was something else, but they knew that I was an owl, so they brought their prejudice to Cerberus. I'm sorry, what? I asked, unfamiliar with the term. An owl. It's someone who communes with nature, but changes their shape. In your culture, it might be something similar to what you may call a werewolf. And the wolf was a shape that I often took. Well, not really, but close enough. I was more of a, how would you say it? A were-coyote, I suppose. I was living in the caves near town, learning my craft, and Jericho came to kill me. I managed to convince him that I was not the culprit, and together, we tracked down the creature that was killing the livestock. What was it? I asked, wincing a little as Cato threw another wolf. A chupacabra? No, don't be absurd, she said, smiling at me with a sly wink. It was a Bruja who had moved into the area and was trying to drive out what she saw as competition. And there was a loud pop, and Cato stood up, panting as he tossed his opponent aside.
Now, we eat.
And with that, they ate almost as furiously as they fought. And when a shadow fell across me, I saw that I had attracted the attention of the king of the underworld. Quite the ceremony, he said, and the plastic fork that he was using to eat little cocktail wieners with looked ridiculous. Well, we aim to please at Garvey Mortuary, I said, and he chuckled. Not your first time talking with an immortal, I take it. Not even the first ruler of the underworld I've had in this hall, I said, looking up and making sure that I hadn't offended him. And how is that strutting peacock these days? Did he sing his songs, or did he save you the embarrassment? Oh, he sang it, I said, looking at the pack of 2 of them tied up over a stake, despite the plate of them within easy reach. I do hate to lose, Jericho, Plato said, chewing the little wieners very thoroughly. He's one of the best of them. Yeah, I'll miss him, I said, and Pluto put a hand on my shoulder. It was like being comforted by a slightly cold statue. In that, I fear that you will not be alone. And Cato smiled as he watched the 2 fight over the meat. And I realized that he was right. They took the body after the service, loaded it up into the wood-paneled station wagon, and drove away. Cato offered me a hand, and before he left, he asked if I'd like to come with them to be part of his father's final ceremony, saying that he thought that he'd want me there, and that he did as well. Surprising even myself, I decided to go. I called Sarah and asked if she wanted to come with me, and she agreed. And we spent the night with the pack, celebrating the life of Jericho and the continued health of his pack. They burned his body, Viking fashion, and the pack howled their sorrows into the stars. We were dropped off at her place afterward, just as the sun came up, and I decided to spend the day there instead of having her drive me home. It was Sunday, and I felt that I was entitled to a day of rest. Jericho may have envisioned paradise as an endless war, but I just wanted one day of rest. But as I lay my head down with Sara's head on my chest, I was struck with more thoughts about the vampire clan that had done this. Why had they done this? What would be Cato's response once he found them? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that when that day came, there would be blood.